Unit 6. Merriam-Webster's Vocabulary Builder. EQU comes from the Latin word equus, meaning equal. To equalize means to make things equal. Things that are equivalent have the same value, use, or meaning. All three sides of an equilateral triangle are of the same length. And an equation, for instance, 21 plus 47 is equal to 68, is a statement that two mathematical expressions are equal. Equable. 1. Tending to remain calm. 2. Free from harsh changes or extreme variation. Her friends thought it odd that such an equable woman had married a man so moody and unpredictable. Equable usually describes either climate or personality. The word seems to be used less today than in decades past, maybe because the personality type is less admired than it used to be. A steady, calm, equable personality may not produce much excitement but usually makes for a good worker and a good parent, and maybe even a longer life. In the words of the poet Robert Service, avoid extremes, be moderate in saving and in spending. An equable and easy gait will win an easy ending. Adequacy. Being equal to some need or requirement. Environmentalists doubt the adequacy of these regulations to protect the wilderness areas. When we question the adequacy of healthcare coverage, or parking facilities, or school funding, we're asking if they are equal to our need. The adjective adequate means enough or acceptable, though in sentences like, his performance was adequate, it really means no better than acceptable. Equilibrium. 1. A state in which opposing forces are balanced so that one is not stronger or greater than the other. 2. A state of emotional balance or calmness. The news had come as a shock, and it took him several minutes to recover his equilibrium. Equilibrium contains a root from the Latin libra, meaning weight or balance. As a constellation, zodiac symbol, an astrological sign, Libra is usually pictured as a set of balanced scales, often held by the blindfolded goddess of justice, which symbolizes fairness, equality, and justice. Equilibrium has special meanings in biology, chemistry, physics, and economics, but in all of them it refers to the balance of competing influences. Equinox. A day when day and night are the same length. She and her friends got together for an equinox party twice a year to celebrate the arrival of the fall and the spring. If you know that nox means night in Latin, it's not hard to remember the meaning of equinox. There are two equinoxes in the year, the spring equinox, around March 21st, and the fall equinox, around September 23rd. The equinoxes are contrasted with the solstices, when the sun is farthest north and south of the equator. The summer solstice occurs around June 22nd, the longest day of the year, the winter solstice around December 22nd, the shortest day. Cause is derived from the Latin verb meaning to seek or obtain. The roots care, queer, and case are derived from the same Latin verb and give us words such as inquiry and question. Inquisition. A questioning or examining that is often harsh or severe. The president's first choice for the job turned him down, fearing the Senate hearings would turn into an inquisition into her past. While an inquiry can be almost any search for truth, the related word inquisition suggests a long, thorough investigation that involves extensive and harsh questioning. Though the two words originally had about the same meaning, today inquisition tends to remind us of the Spanish Inquisition, an ongoing trial conducted by church-appointed inquisitors that began in the Middle Ages and sought out non-believers, Jews, and Muslims, thousands of whom were sentenced to torture and to burning at the stake. Perquisite. 1. A privilege or profit that is provided in addition to one's base salary. 2. Something claimed as an exclusive possession or right. A new car, a big house, and yearly trips to Europe were among the perquisites that made the presidency of Windham College such an attractive position. Though the Latin source of perquisite originally meant something insistently asked for, the ask meaning has mostly vanished from the English word. A perquisite, often called simply a perk, is instead something of value that the holder of a particular job or position is entitled to, usually without even asking. The President of the United States, for instance, enjoys as perquisites the use of Camp David and Air Force One. Perhaps because perquisites are usually available to only a small number of people, the word sometimes refers to non-job-related privileges that are claimed as exclusive rights. Acquisitive. Eager to acquire, greedy. With each year, the couple became more madly acquisitive, buying jewelry, a huge yacht, and 2 country estates. Unlike most tribal peoples and the populations of some older countries, we Americans live in an acquisitive society, a society devoted to getting and spending. And America often makes successfully acquisitive people into heroes. Even Ebenezer Scrooge, that model of miserly greed and acquisitiveness, was once defended by a White House chief of staff. An acquisitive nation may seek to acquire other territories by force. But mental acquisition of specialized knowledge or skills, or new vocabulary, doesn't deprive others of the same information. Requisition. A demand or request, such as for supplies, made with proper authority. The teachers had grown impatient with having to submit a requisition for even routine classroom supplies. Requisition was originally a noun but is now probably more common as a verb. So we either can speak of sending our office's purchasing department a requisition for computers, or of requisitioning more computers from the department. The word has an official sound to it. However, one of Hollywood's bittersweet love stories begins when Omar Sharif, playing a World War II freedom fighter, says to Ingrid Bergman, who is the owner of a stately old yellow Rolls-Royce, "I've come to requisition your car." Ple. Plen. Comes from a Latin word meaning, to fill. It can be seen in the words plenty, meaning basically filled, and complete, meaning thoroughly filled. Plenary. 1. Including all who have a right to attend. 2. Complete in all ways. For the convention's plenary session, 5,000 members gathered to hear a star speaker. Plenary often shows up in writing referring to the plenary power held by a government, and is particularly used for powers mentioned in a constitution. For example, under the U.S. Constitution, the Congress has plenary power to wage war, which means that no one else, not the courts, not the states, not the president, has any power whatsoever to second-guess Congress about war-making. But in recent years, that hasn't stopped some presidents from starting conflicts that looked a lot like wars to most people. At a conference, the plenary sessions, unlike the various smaller presentations, workshops, forums, and seminars that otherwise fill the day, try to bring everyone together in the same room. Complement. 1. Something that fills up or makes perfect, the amount needed to make something complete. 2. A counterpart. On the committee, the 2 young people provided an energetic compliment to the older members. A compliment fills out or balances something. We think of salt as the complement of pepper, maybe mostly because of their colors, and the right necktie is a perfect complement to a good suit. Complement can also mean the full quantity, number, or amount. Thus, a ship's complement of officers and crew is the whole force necessary for full operation. Complement is actually most common as a verb. We may say, for example, that a bright blue scarf complements a cream-colored outfit beautifully. Don't confuse compliment with compliment, which means an expression of respect or affection. Deplete. To reduce in amount by using up. Years of farming on the same small plot of land had left the soil depleted of minerals. The de prefix often means, do the opposite of, so deplete means the opposite of, fill. Thus, for example, a kitchen's food supplies can be rapidly depleted by hungry teenagers. But deplete often suggests something more serious. Desertions can deplete an army, layoffs can deplete an office staff, and too much time in bed can rapidly deplete your muscular strength. Replete. Fully or abundantly filled or supplied. The professor's autobiography was replete with scandalous anecdotes about campus life in the 1950s. Replete implies that something is filled almost to capacity. Autumn landscapes in New England are replete with colorful foliage. Supermarket tabloids are always replete with details of stars' lives, whether real or imaginary. And a professor may complain that most of the papers she received were replete with errors in grammar and punctuation. Measure. Meter. Comes to us from Greek by way of Latin. In both languages it refers to measure. A thermometer measures heat, a perimeter is the measure around something, and things that are isometric are equal in measure. Metric. 1. Relating to or based on the metric system. 2. Relating to or arranged in meter. Americans have resisted using the metric system for years, but are now slowly getting accustomed to a few of the metric units. The metric system was invented in France in the years following the French Revolution, and a version of it is now used in most of the world to measure distance, weight, and volume. Basic metric units include the kilogram, the basic unit of weight, the liter, the basic unit of volume, and of course the meter, the basic unit of length, see below. Metric, or more often metrical, can also refer to the basic underlying rhythm of songs and poetry. So while the scientists' measurements are usually metric, the poets are usually metrical. Meter. 1. The basic metric unit of length, equal to about 39.37 inches. 2. A systematic rhythm in poetry or music. The basic meter of the piece was 3 out of 4, but its rhythms were so complicated that the 3 out of 4 was sometimes hard to hear. Meter is a metric measurement slightly longer than a yard, thus, a 100-meter dash might take you a second longer than a 100-yard dash. But the word has a different sense in music, where people aren't separated by whether they use the metric system. For a musician, the meter is the regular background rhythm, expressed by the time signature, written at the beginning of a piece or section, 2 out of 2, 2 out of 4, 3 out of 8, 4/4, 6 out of 8, etc. Within a meter, you can create rhythms that range from the simple to the complex. So, for example, America the Beautiful is in 4/4 meter, or 4/4 time, but so are most of the rhythmically complex songs written by Paul Simon, Burt Bacharach, or Stevie Wonder. In ordinary conversation, though, most people use rhythm to include meter and everything that's built on top of it. In poetry, meter has much the same meaning. However, poetic meters aren't named with numbers but instead with traditional Greek and Latin terms such as iambic and dactylic. Odometer. An instrument used to measure distance traveled. Jennifer watched the odometer to see how far she would have to drive to her new job. Odometer includes the root from the Greek word hodos, meaning road or trip. An odometer shares space on your dashboard with a speedometer, a tachometer, and maybe a trip meter. The odometer is what crooked car salesmen tamper with when they want to reduce the mileage a car registers as having traveled. One of life's little pleasures is watching the odometer as all the numbers change at the same time. Tachometer. A device used to measure speed of rotation. Even though one purpose of a tachometer is to help drivers keep their engine speeds down, some of us occasionally try to see how high we can make the needle go. A tachometer is literally a speed measurer, since the Greek root tach means speed. This is clear in the names of the tachyon, a particle of matter that travels faster than the speed of light. If it actually exists, it's so fast that it's impossible to see with any instrument, and tachycardia, a medical condition in which the heart races uncontrollably. Since the speed that an auto tachometer measures is speed of rotation of the crankshaft, the numbers it reports are revolutions per minute, or RPMs. AUD. From the Latin verb audire, is the root that has to do with hearing. What is audible can be heard. An audience is a group of listeners, sometimes seated in an auditorium. And audio today can mean almost anything that has to do with sound. Auditor. A person who formally examines and verifies financial accounts. It seems impossible that so many banks could have gotten into so much trouble if their auditors had been doing their jobs. The auditing of a company's financial records by independent examiners on a regular basis is necessary to prevent cooking the books, and thus to keep the company honest. We don't normally think of auditors as listening, since looking at and adding up numbers is their basic line of work, but auditors do have to listen to people's explanations, and perhaps that's the historical link. Hearing is more obviously part of another meaning of audit, the kind that college students do when they sit in on a class without taking exams or receiving an official grade. Auditory. 1. Perceived or experienced through hearing. 2. Of or relating to the sense or organs of hearing. With the surround sound systems in most theaters, going to a movie is now an auditory experience as much as a visual one. Auditory is close in meaning to acoustic and acoustical, but auditory usually refers more to hearing than to sound. For instance, many dogs have great auditory, not acoustic, powers, and the auditory nerve lets us hear by connecting the inner ear to the brain. Acoustic and acoustical instead refer especially to instruments and the conditions under which sound can be heard, so architects concern themselves with the acoustic properties of an auditorium, and instrument makers with those of a clarinet or piano. Audition. A trial performance to evaluate a performer's skills. Auditions for Broadway shows attract so many hopeful unknown performers that everyone in the business calls them cattle calls. Most stars are discovered at auditions, where a number of candidates read the same part and the director chooses. Lana Turner famously skipped the audition process and was instead discovered by an agent sipping a soda in a Sunset Boulevard cafe at age 16. Audition can also be a verb, so, for example, after Miss Turner gained her stardom, actors had to audition to be her leading man. But when musicians audition for a job in an orchestra, it's usually behind a screen so that the judges won't even know their sex and therefore can't do anything but listen. Inaudible. Not heard or capable of being heard. The coach spoke to her in a low voice that was inaudible to the rest of the gymnastics team. With its negative prefix in, inaudible means the opposite of audible. What's clearly audible to you may be inaudible to your elderly grandfather. Modern spy technology can turn inaudible conversations into audible ones with the use of high-powered directional microphones, so if you think you're being spied on, make sure there's a lot of other noise around you. And if you don't want everyone around you to know you're bored, keep your sighs inaudible. Son is the Latin root meaning sound. Sonata, meaning a piece for one or two instruments, was originally an Italian verb meaning sounded. When singers were involved, the Italians used a different verb. And sonorous means full, loud, or rich in sound. Sonic. 1. Having to do with sound. 2. Having to do with the speed of sound in air, about 750 miles per hour. A sonic depth finder can easily determine the depth of a lake by bouncing a sound signal off the bottom. A sonic boom is an explosive sound created by a shock wave formed at the nose of an aircraft. In 1947, a plane piloted by Chuck Yeager burst the sound barrier and created the first sonic boom. In the decades afterwards, sonic booms became a familiar sound to Americans. Because of steps that were eventually taken, sonic booms are rarely heard anymore. Today, sonic is often used by ambitious rock musicians to describe their experimental sounds. Dissonant. 1. Clashing or discordant, especially in music. 2. Incompatible or disagreeing. Critics of the healthcare plan pointed to its two seemingly dissonant goals: cost containment, which would try to control spending, and universal coverage, which could increase spending. Since dissonant includes the negative prefix dis, what is dissonant sounds or feels unresolved, unharmonic, and clashing. Early in the 20th century, composers such as Arnold Schoenberg and his students developed the use of dissonance in music as a style in itself. But to many listeners, the sounds in such music are still unbearable, and most continue to prefer music based on traditional tonality. Dissonant is now often used without referring to sound at all. Cognitive dissonance, for example, is what happens when you believe two different things that can't actually both be true. Resonance. 1. A continuing or echoing of sound. 2. A richness and variety in the depth and quality of sound. The resonance of James Earl Jones's vocal tones in such roles as Darth Vader made his voice one of the most recognizable of its time. Many of the finest musical instruments possess a high degree of resonance which, by producing additional vibrations and echoes of the original sound, enriches and amplifies it. Violins made by the Italian masters Stradivari and Guarneri possess a quality of resonance that later violin makers have never precisely duplicated. And you may have noticed how a particular note will start something in a room buzzing, as one of the touching surfaces begins to resonate with the note. Because of that, resonance and resonate, along with the adjective resonant, aren't always used to describe sound. For example, you may say that a novel resonates strongly with you because the author seems to be describing your own experiences and feelings. Ultrasonic. Having a frequency higher than what can be heard by the human ear. My grandfather's dog is always pricking up its ears at some ultrasonic signal, while he himself is so deaf he can't even hear a bird singing. Ultrasound, or ultrasonography, works on the principle that sound is reflected at different speeds by tissues or substances of different densities. Ultrasound technology has been used medically since the 1940s. Sonograms, the pictures produced by ultrasound, can reveal heart defects, tumors, and gallstones. Since low-power ultrasonic waves don't present any risks to a body, they're most often used to display fetuses during pregnancy in order to make sure they're healthy. Ultrasonics has many other uses, including underwater sonar sensing. High-power ultrasonics are so intense that they're actually used for drilling and welding. Yar. From the Latin verb errare, means to wander or to stray. The root is seen in the word error, meaning a wandering or straying from what is correct or true. Erratum, plural, errata, is Latin for mistake, so an errata page is a book page that lists mistakes found too late to correct before the book's publication. Errant. 1. Wandering or moving about aimlessly. 2. Straying outside proper bounds, or away from an accepted pattern or standard. Modern-day cowboys have been known to use helicopters to spot errant calves. Errant means both wandering and mistaken. A knight-errant was a wandering knight who went about slaying dragons or rescuing damsels in distress, at least when he was on good behavior. Errant is an old-fashioned spelling of errant. An errant knave, the phrase comes from Shakespeare, is an extremely untrustworthy individual. An errant sock might be one that's gotten lost, an errant politician might be one who's been caught cheating, and an errant cloud might be one that floats by all alone in a deep blue sky on a summer day. Aberrant. Straying or differing from the right, normal, or natural type. Sullivan's increasingly aberrant behavior was leading his friends to question his mental stability. Something aberrant has wandered away from the usual path or form. The word is generally used in a negative way. Aberrant behavior, for example, may be a symptom of other problems. But the discovery of an aberrant variety of a species can be exciting news to a biologist, and identifying an aberrant gene has led the way to new treatments for diseases. Erratic. 1. Having no fixed course. 2. Lacking in consistency. In the 1993 World Series, the Phillies weren't helped by the erratic performance of their ace relief pitcher, Wild Thing. Erratic can refer to literal wandering. A missile that loses its guidance system may follow an erratic path, and a river with lots of twists and bends is said to have an erratic course. Erratic can also mean inconsistent or irregular. So a stock market that often changes direction is said to be acting erratically. An erratic heartbeat can be cause for concern, and if your car idles erratically it may mean that something's wrong with the spark plug wiring. Erroneous. Mistaken, incorrect. For years her parents had had an erroneous idea of her intelligence, because she didn't begin to talk until the age of 6. Erroneous basically means containing errors, and, since most of us are constantly suffering from mistaken notions, the word is often used in front of words such as assumption and idea. It's also used to describe the kind of mistaken information that can lead to erroneous theories, erroneous conclusions, and erroneous decisions. Cede comes from the Latin verb cedere, meaning to proceed or to yield. Proceed itself employs the root, as does recede, and their related nouns procession and recession employ another form of the Latin verb. Cede. To give up, especially by treaty, yield. Their 88-year-old father reluctantly ceded control over his finances to 2 of the children this year. Cede is often a formal term used in discussing territory and rights, but is also used less formally. So, for example, Spain ceded Puerto Rico to the U.S. in 1898, following the Spanish-American War, and the U.S. ceded control of the Panama Canal to Panama in 1999. Critics warn that we are ceding leadership in alternative energy technology to China. Citizens of one European country or another are always worrying that their own country is ceding too much power to the European Union. A tennis player doesn't have any choice when she cedes her number 1 ranking to a rival. Concede. To admit grudgingly, yield. To his friends, Senator Beasley concedes that his re-election campaign was badly run and that he made several damaging errors. After the votes have been counted, one candidate traditionally concedes the election to his or her opponent by giving a concession speech. If you're lucky, your boss will concede that she was wrong the last time she criticized you. But in the middle of an argument, we're not all so good at conceding that the other guy might have a good point. Accede. 1. To give in to a request or demand. 2. To give approval or consent. This time Congress refused to accede to the demands of the president, and began cutting the funding for the war. To accede usually means to yield, often under pressure and with some reluctance, to the needs or requests of others. Voters usually accede to a tax increase only when they're convinced it's the only real solution to a shortfall in government funding. A patient may accede to surgery only after the doctor assures him it's better than the alternatives. If you accede to your spouse's plea to watch the new reality show at 9 o'clock, you may get to choose something better at 10 o'clock. Precedent. Something done or said that may be an example or rule to guide later acts of a similar kind. When Judy bought Christmas presents for all her relatives one year, she claimed that it set no precedent, but it did. A precedent is something that precedes, or comes before. The Supreme Court relies on precedents, that is, earlier laws or decisions that provide some example or rule to guide them in the case they're actually deciding. When hostages are being held for ransom, a government may worry about setting a bad precedent if it gives in. And a company might break with precedent by naming a foreigner as its president for the first time. Words from mythology and history. Augean stable. A condition or place marked by great accumulation of filth or corruption. Leaders of many of the newly formed nations of Eastern Europe found that the old governments of their countries had become Augean stables that they must now clean out. Augeas, the mythical king of Elis, kept great stables that held 3,000 oxen and had not been cleaned for 30 years when Hercules was assigned the job as one of his famous 12 labors. This task was enormous even for someone so mighty, so Hercules shifted the course of 2 rivers to make them pour through the stables. Augean by itself has come to mean extremely difficult or distasteful, and to clean the Augean stable usually means either to clear away corruption or to perform a large and unpleasant task that has long called for attention. So today we refer to Augean tasks, Augean labor, or even Augean clutter. And the British firm Augean plc is, what else, a waste management company. Croesus. A very rich person. Warren Buffett's extraordinary record of acquiring and investing made him an American Croesus. Croesus, which tends to appear in the phrase, rich as Croesus, was the name of a king of Lydia, an ancient kingdom in what is now western Turkey, who died around 546 BC. Lydia was probably the first country in history to use coins, and under the wealthy and powerful Croesus the first coins of pure silver and gold were produced, which may have added to the legends surrounding his wealth. But it was Croesus who the Greek lawgiver Solon was thinking about when he said, "Count no man happy until his death," and indeed Croesus was finally overthrown and may even have been burned alive. Dragon's teeth. Seeds of conflict. Many experts believe that, in invading a Middle Eastern country that hadn't attacked us, we were sowing dragon's teeth. The Phoenician prince Cadmus once killed a dragon, and was instructed by the goddess Athena to plant its teeth in the ground. From the many teeth, there immediately sprang up an army of fierce armed men. The goddess then directed him to throw a precious stone into their midst, and they proceeded to slaughter each other until only the 5 greatest warriors were left. These became Cadmus's generals, with whom he constructed the great city-state of Thebes. When we sow dragon's teeth, we're creating the conditions for future trouble. Hades. The underground home of the dead in Greek mythology. In a dramatic scene, he crawls up out of the ground coated in black petroleum as though emerging from Hades. In Greek mythology, Hades is both the land of the dead and the god who rules there. Hades the god, who the Greeks also called Pluto, is the brother of Zeus and Poseidon, who rule the skies and the seas. The realm called Hades, where he rules with his wife Persephone, is the region under the earth, full of mineral wealth and fertility and home to dead souls. Hades today is sometimes used as a polite term for hell. It's hotter than Hades in here. Lethargic. 1. Lazily sluggish. 2. Indifferent or apathetic. Once again the long Sunday dinner had left most of the family feeling stuffed and lethargic. The philosopher Plato wrote that before a dead person could leave the underworld to begin a new life, he or she had to drink from the river Lethe, whose name means forgetfulness in Greek, and forget all aspects of one's former life and the time spent in Hades, usually pretty awful, according to Plato. But lethargic and its noun lethargy never actually refer to forgetting. Instead, they describe the weak, ghostly state of the dead spirits, so weak that they may require a drink of blood before they can even speak. Midas touch. The talent for making money in every venture. Investors are always looking for an investment advisor with the Midas touch, but after a couple of good years each advisor's brilliance usually seems to vanish. Midas was a legendary king of Phrygia, in modern-day Turkey. In return for a good deed, he was granted one wish by the god Dionysus, and asked for the power to turn everything he touched into gold. When he discovered to his horror that his touch had turned his food and drink and even his daughter to gold, he begged Dionysus to take back the gift, and Dionysus agreed to do so. When Midas touch is used today, the moral of this tale of greed is usually ignored. Pyrrhic victory. A victory won at excessive cost. That win turned out to be a Pyrrhic victory, since our best players sustained injuries that would sideline them for weeks. In 279 BC, Pyrrhus, the king of Epirus, a country in northwest Greece, defeated the Romans at the Battle of Osculum, but lost all of his best officers and many men. He is said to have exclaimed after the battle, "One more such victory and we are lost." Pyrrhic victories are more common than we tend to think. Whenever we win an argument but in so doing manage to offend the friend we were arguing with, or whenever a country invades another country but rouses widespread opposition in surrounding countries in the process, it's probably a Pyrrhic victory that has been achieved. Stygian. Extremely dark, dank, gloomy, and forbidding. When the power went out in the building, the halls and stairwells were plunged in Stygian darkness. The Greek underworld of Hades was cold and dark, rather than blazing like the Christian image of hell. The river Styx, whose name meant hateful in Greek, was the chief river of the underground, and the souls of the dead were ferried across its poisonous waters into Hades by the boatman Charon. The Styx was so terrible that even the gods swore by its name in their most solemn oaths. The name Stygia, borrowed from Stygian, is used for a country in fantasy games today, but a Stygian atmosphere, a Stygian tunnel, Stygian darkness, and so on, still describe the dreary cheerlessness of the Greek underworld.